So we have a R9 290 here that's doing video rendering right now. As you can hear, it sounds like a jet engine because the card down here has a scroll fan on it that we'll take a look a bit closer later. But the card is pretty good. There's 4 gigs of RAM, 5 12-bit memory bus, and it does pretty well rendering, and it stays cool as well. And we'll compare it to the other cards in the R9 series. Gone ahead and powered off the system running the R290 just so you can hear the difference in sound versus the 280 that we're going to take a look at now. So this system is maxed out right now. The 290 that we just looked at had a fan running at about 4,000 RPM. It has a loud scroll fan that keeps it cool. It's a single blade. This one has a dual fan. It's the Vapor X here, the Sapphire. And it's supposed to run really quietly. As you can hear, it is pretty quiet, but unfortunately it doesn't keep cool enough, and it does have to downclock once the core temperature of the GPU does go above 63-64 degrees Celsius. So we're going to take a look at the other cards in the lineup as well in a second. But as you can see, it only needs 2 6-pin PCI connectors on it, versus the R9 over here needed an 8-pin adapter in order for the machine to even be able to boot off of it along with the 6-pin, which is kind of unusual for the ATI cards. So we have the R9 270X here as well. It is one of the lower end models on the R9 series, but it still has 2 gigs of RAM, and it is a pretty decent card if you're gaming with it. Over here I have a machine that I use for gaming. It has 2 R9 270s in Crossfire in them. They didn't really fit in this case, unfortunately, because it is a smaller mid-tower. I did have to modify the case a bit to get them to fit inside, but that's okay because it is an older and cheap case. But they are in Crossfire with the Crossfire cable over there. And they do actually run pretty cool, even if I try rendering on them as well. I can run them for a few days, no problem, and they'll run full load and won't downclock at all in order to compensate for the heat creation. We'll take a look at these cards in person in a second. Alright, so we have the array of cards here. Pretty much most of the R9 series. We have the 290, 280, 270 here. As well as up here we have one of the 2 series ago, the 69 series. They're all ATI cards, but basically newer chips down here, as I said, older over there. Now this is the highest end card that is made by ATI right now for desktop gaming. There is a different version that is slightly better, but it's pretty close to being the highest end you can get. Now, as you can see on this card, there's only 1 fan. But as I said earlier, it is a scroll fan, so it runs at much higher RPMs in order to keep everything cool. And it does a very good job keeping it cool, but it does make a lot more noise. So if you're not concerned with the noise, then this card is probably fine for you. But it does require a larger power supply. And as you can see, that 8-pin is actually fully needed. Some of the older cards that had 8 pins, actually this one over here, the 69 had an 8-pin as well, but you could actually put a 6-pin in it for power and it worked fine. So as far as this card goes, make sure you have at least, I think they recommend the 650 watt power supply for it, but you can probably get away with a bit smaller PSU if you want to run this card, but I'd go as close as that to possible or higher. Now the outputs on it, pretty much all the R9 series has a DisplayPort, HDMI, and 2 DVI, unlike the older series where you had the ability to have up to 6 outputs on them. So that's the 290. Let's move over to the 280 here. As I said earlier, unfortunately it didn't do a very good job of keeping cool. Pretty much the fan maxed out and the card kept getting warmer until it had to downclock. Now this card is only requires 2 6-pins, even though it has 2 8-pins on it for power in order for the machine to boot. Once again, it has the as far as outputs, HDMI, DisplayPort, and 2 DVI. It has a DVI-D and a DVI-I. I'm not sure why they made 2 different outputs on it, But yeah, these two cards are Sapphire. I'm not sure why they're unable to keep their Vapor X cooling card not cool for whatever reason, but the 290 does keep pretty cool, so I'm happy with that. Now if we move over here to the 270, it's made by Gigabyte instead of Sapphire. The outputs on it, same thing as I said before, has the exact same outputs as the 280. As far as keeping cool, it does an excellent job with the 3 fans. 2 6-pin PSU connections on it, PCI connections. As far as everything else goes, it is a much lower clocked card, like it is slower, so that's probably another reason why it can keep cool besides the fan. I mean, you can see the heatsink is much larger on the 280 than it is on the 270, and it still doesn't keep it cool. So if we look back at an older generation card, such as the 6950 I have here, that's not in use anymore, it has actually 4 DisplayPort outputs with the DVI, but you did require to get active adapters, which costs about $40 in order to get 6 monitor outputs on it, without even cross-firing it, where you can have up to 12. It does have the crossfire bridge, so you can connect it to 2 other cards as well, versus all these cards connect to 1 other card with their single. Well, this one is actually dual. I'm actually wrong here. Let's take a look at 270. The 270 has 1 connection, and the 290 does not connect to anything else. It's a single standalone card only.